Okay, so welcome to our ICONIS event, a new scholarship showcase. This is our monthly virtual event of the ICONIS committee on new directions in scholarship, where we discuss new books in public law. My name is Barrihun Gabaye, and I'm a member of the committee and a lecturer in law in the Faculty of Laws at University College London. Today, we will be discussing a new book, Systemic Corruption, Constitutional Ideas for an Anti-Oligarchic Republic, published by Princeton University Press in 2020. For this event, we are joined by the author, Camila Vergara, and two distinguished discussants, Anna Canilla and Zoran Oklopcic. All of them are distinguished scholars known to this audience. So I will only give a very brief introduction of our panelists so that we have more time to listen to what they have to say about this important and timely book. Camila Vergara is a Marie Curie Fellow at the University of Cambridge, researching on the relation between inequality, domination, and the law. She is the author of Systemic Corruption, Constitutional Ideas for an Anti-Oligarchic Republic, the book we are discussing today, and the co-editor of Machiavelli on Liberty and Conflict, published by University of Chicago Press in 2017. Her work on republicanism, corruption, and populism has been published in academic journals such as the Journal of Political Philosophy, Philosophy and Social Criticism, and the European Journal of Social Sciences. Anna Canilla is a lecturer in public law at the University of Glasgow. She teaches constitutional and administrative law and convenes the honors course, Gender, Sexualities, and the Law. Prior to joining Glasgow, she was a lecturer in law at the University of Reading, where she completed her PhD on majorities and courts, a defense of political constitutionalism in liberal democracies in 2019. Her research interests include constitutional theory and feminist legal theory. Her most recent publication is Political Constitutionalism in the Age of Populism, currently available online on Revus Journal for Constitutional Theory and the Philosophy of Law. And she is currently working on a project on normative order and normative powers and consent to sex. Zoran Oklopcic is associate professor at the Department of Law and Legal Studies at Carleton University. In the past, he was a McCormick Visiting Fellow at the University of Edinburgh School of Law, junior faculty at Harvard Law School's Institute for Global Law and Policy in Doha, Qatar, and a Hauser Global Research Fellow at the NYU School of Law. His book, Beyond the People, Social Imaginary and Constituent Imagination, was published by Oxford University Press in 2018. Thank you so much for joining us today. So we will start the discussion with a brief presentation by Camilla introducing the main themes and interventions of the book, followed by comments from our two discussants and a response from the author. We will then have a Q&A session. As you know, for members of the audience, you can use either the chat or raise hand function to ask questions or participate in the discussion. Now it is time to hear from the author. Camilla, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Barrihun. And thank you for organizing this panel. It was the end of the semester and everybody was busy. So I want to thank you and also Anna and Zoran. Anna has been actually helping me further the book, pushing the scholarship and having a lot of patience also with me. So I greatly appreciate it. And Zoran has been, I think, digesting the ideas and being creative about it. So I'm very excited about this panel. So thank you so much. I want to talk about how the book came about. So it is read in context. and then go briefly a survey of the chapters and the objective of it. So this book started 15 years ago, more or less. And it started as a project of how to change a constitutional structure that has become oppressive or was oppressive from the beginning in the more democratic way. So it started as a project of constituent power and constituent processes that very fast became part of a project that was also proposing a structure, because what is the use of having the most democratic mechanism to change a constitution in order to have the same thing that we had before, but 2.0 is not really worth it. So, and why are you going to dismantle all that infrastructure, political infrastructure that you could create in order to have a new form of representative government, and not why think outside of the box? So this book starts from the understanding that in my place of birth, Chile, we had an imposed constitution in which the dictatorship basically yielded this codification of neoliberalism on one side, also a very conservative form of politics, and a politics that it was exclusively representative, in which the people have no power whatsoever. So as I went into my studies, it was clear to me that at some point we needed to change this structure. It's just wishful thinking that we were going to end with this structure forever. So therefore, we need to think about a way to change it. So when the book came out and when the manuscript was ready, not when it came out, because you know that it takes like a year and a half to get out. It's just like, giving birth and all these, steps and the copy editing and all these things. The manuscript was ready a few months before the uprising of October 2019 in Chile, which began the constituent process. So I was so ready for this moment, and the book was for this moment. It was basically written with Chile in the background and Chile in the future, if you will, but it was never said, it was never mentioned, because it was supposed to be a book for changing any structure, because all of the representative governments that we have today are similar in a way. They can have different rules, but at the end, they don't have a place for the people to exercise their political rights directly in person. And this is something that we used to have before. So in order to push for this, a new kind of update of the mainframe of constitutional democracy, I went into first a diagnosis of it. So chapter 1 is about systemic corruption. And this is the idea that the structure allows for the enrichment of, the 1% or the 10%. The structure allows for men to benefit disproportionately from the rules of the game that oppresses women. There are several forms of domination that are structural, that are the result of the system as how it works, not someone abusing the system, but just, how it, we apply it. So there's nothing wrong with it in a way in terms of legally wrong, but it is nevertheless corrupt. And in our Western mind, in which the Greeks understood corruption as a form of having undue power and benefiting your class or yourself against the good of the whole, the common good, this was corruption. And this is what we need to recover for today in order to not understand corruption as merely individual, like some people that are the bad apples, but actually understand the system as working, as producing these apples and allowing the enabling, the few to take advantage of the system, because this is what the system offers. So after that diagnosis, I go and investigate, the origin of representative democracy, which is the American and French revolutions, but basically the American structure, and see and all the political theory and history around it, and found immediately that there was a power and property at the center of that structure, that it was basically a narrative that was seen basically from the future. Now we see it as something that it was democratic from the beginning, but those founders were anti-democratic. They were against democracy as a form of government. They wanted the people far away from power. And that structure is what has endured in different ways, mutated, being edited, but basically that structure with the people have no institution and is far, far away from power and select others to govern. This is what we have and we call democracy. And then in order to build, a new paradigm to understand this and to put forward a new model, I try to challenge the way that we study constitutions. Today we are studying constitutions as the written text. We have the history. We have the jurisprudence. There's things are taken into account, but we never really take into account the outcome all the time. It's not something that we incorporate. Prudential interpretations of the constitutional law is done, but it's not primordial, and in many cases not even there. So there's something that we need to incorporate in order to understand if that law that is being passed or the structure is either emancipatory or is oppressive of the common people. So it is not about how if we can do the syllogism of the formal syllogism of the law, or if there is a correct interpretation within some school of thought, but it's how that what are the consequences, the impact that that law or regulation has on the real world. That needs to be taken into account, and this is what I call material constitutionalism, looking at law and basic rules from the point of view of power structures, and they're taking into account, and that law is not neutral. Very far from neutral. And then I go into the middle chapters are kind of an archival aim at having new institutions that were thought about in the past, maybe implemented, maybe not, but those kind of creative objects and methods that we can draw from to propose something for today. So I survey Machiavelli, Condorcet in the French Revolution, then Rosa Luxemburg in the beginning of the 20th century, and then Hannah Arendt and her theory of new beginnings and through the councils. And I rescue this idea that the people need to have an active role in politics. And this does not mean voting, because voting means delegating your power to others, but it's actual making decisions on your local community. And we cannot think about one assembly because, we have, this is impossible in a way. So as based on Condorcet and others that have proposed this, basing this new idea of popular sovereignty as an interconnected people that is assembled at the local level and connected in a network. And this is something that I propose at the end of the book, and kind of a proposal that can be incorporated to any constitutional structure, because you're adding a new institution that has some powers. It doesn't have all the powers, but you can give functions to that, network of assemblies of the people to have some binding power. And it could be gradual. So in a way, it's kind of introducing a new actor in order to shift the way the system works, not to eliminate the system as kind of more radical democracy points out. The idea that we need to kind of raise it to the ground and do something else, but incorporating the people into the system in order to change the system from within. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this excellent presentation. Now I invite Anna for her comments.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Camila, for the introduction. I found it very interesting that you mentioned you had Chile in mind while you were writing the book, because while I was reading it, I assume you had the US in mind. From what I was looking into, perhaps I had the US in mind for obvious reasons in constitutional scholarship. But it's good that you mentioned that, because before I get started with my long list of questions and comments that I try to cover in 20 minutes, I'd love to hear a little bit, if we have time later, on what are your views on Chile's experience right now? I guess you've been testing all of the book's ideas, or some of them, and it would be great to hear your thoughts on what's actually going on in constitutional theories practice for a change. So that could be very exciting. I really love the book. I learned so much about the genealogy of plebeian thought. I found it very interesting, bold, very well researched, and very clear and to the point, straightforward. So that's great. And I found it very courageous and brave to use all of those ideas to, shed some light and push forward all of our democratic aspirations in an actual institutionalized, constitutionalized way, as you do towards the end of the book. So that's great. So I have a number of questions / comments, but I don't think I'll be able to cover them in 20 minutes. So I'm going to start, instead of starting in the beginning, I think I'm going to go straight forward. I'm going to start in the middle, in what I think is my core question, or more and more challenging question, perhaps, for this kind of project. And it has to do with, what do you think is the role of morality in material constitutionalism, if there's any role for morality at all? And the reason why I think this is my core question is because when I was reading the book, most of the questions I seem to have were around how we deal with moral disagreement in whatever institutionalized network of local assemblies and so on. And in particular, I was thinking, for instance, when we speak about you speak about a local network of local assemblies, right? That they would perhaps veto some of the, government's decisions, for instance. I wonder two things. One is, what are the kind of things that are wrong and that are worth vetoing, which is perhaps a project for a different book, and I acknowledge that. But I do think it's relevant for this book and for this project that you tell us a little bit about, when do we know when it is worth vetoing something? Because I guess that the plebeian assemblies will need to pick their battles, because deliberation and struggle and social struggle and politicization has costs in terms of coordination, right? People at the end of the day want to have free time to spend with family and friends or contemplate nature, and that's an important, cost when it comes to political participation in this more intense way that you are proposing. That's one thing. And the other thing is, how do you envisage that plebeian branch? Because 99%, it's at the end of the 99%, it's a metaphor, right? We know that there's not an homogeneous 99% thing out there. Things would be way easier if that was the case. But for better or worse, pluralism is a fact. Within local assemblies, probably there will be harsh disagreement that will be politically charged. And I'm not speaking only about in terms of the usual oppression within, the different social groups within the social structure, say men and women, racialized people and white people, and so on and so forth. But about, people that, so if you speak about the aggregation of assemblies, this is the whole plebeian branch, if I'm right, yeah. Within those assemblies and within that branch, there will be individual aggregation. I mean, it's difficult to aggregate individual preferences and interests and needs, because sometimes they have to be conflicted. They are conflicted. So think about, I don't know, a local assembly that is in an area that has, a scarcity of, natural resources such as water. And then there's another local assembly that has lots of water, but they've got this project, about, they are very environmentalist and they don't want to transfer their natural resources to this other assembly. That's not necessarily a matter of dealing with structural power, but dealing with different life projects and with different collective projects and with different understanding of what a community is about and what our common life is about within our own jurisdictions. So, and ultimately, that's a question of constitutional theory and a question of constitutional and institutional design, because we need to say, okay, who gets to do what? who's going to decide, who's going to have the last say within that plebeian branch. So I guess that the way, the role of morality, the role of how to deal with deep reasonable disagreement that we see in the most liberal constitutionalist debates will somehow replicate at that other level. And I'd like to hear a little bit about what you have to say on that front. Another related point on how to deal with a disagreement at that level has to do now with fallibility. So, and with the role of experts, say, in making this kind of decisions in public life. So let's think again in terms of climate change. I am an ordinary citizen, I myself, I don't know much about meteorology and physics of how climate change works. I know a little bit from what I read and what I gather out there, but I'm certainly, I wouldn't even feel comfortable making decisions on the levels of gases that are polluting our atmosphere and so on and so forth. So do we have an epistemic hierarchy within the assemblies, or do we have any inputs that are legitimate because they have, scientific authorities and not because they have strictly democratic legitimacy? Or does everyone have the same amount of voice and vote all of the time? At some point we want to hear to experts, or maybe we don't. And then in terms of going back to my original question on what is the role of morality, if at all, in a plebeian or material constitutionalism, at some point in the beginning of the book, you mentioned that you want this branch to be able to make decisions, not because those decisions would mirror a set of ethico-political standards that we have to, try to aim at ideally, but because morality and reasonable and what is regarded as reasonable is a changing thing, and we want the constitutional arrangements to meet and to mirror conventional views on what is right and what is wrong. Now that sounded a bit relativistic to me, because I do think there are moral facts out there, like, you say rape is wrong, no matter what, was said 500 years ago, and no matter what the church has to say, and no matter what, conservatives have to say, and no matter what I have to say, that will not change the fact that rape is wrong. And I wonder if you want to entrench or protect some moral facts based on some sets of ethico-political principles or values, in a way that might as well have to be open-ended, as it usually happens, but whether it is valuable for the well-being and the emancipatory potential of the plebeians themselves to protect or entrench at least some things. And this is relevant in terms of institutional design as well, because I think that you mentioned that the network of local assemblies would make decisions on simple majorities, and that is very unstable, or could deliver a very unstable political arena, because if a simple majority can reverse the outcome of a previous political decision-making process, then, each time, say, we win the right to abortion, and the next political assembly in 5 years' time will reverse that very easily, just by counting 51 votes over 49. So I was wondering, this, I know it sounds very liberal, and we're trying to address the shortcomings of liberalism, and that's something we definitely need to do. But I don't want to move backwards, right? I want to move forwards, and abandoning morality and abandoning the moral questions and abandoning how we deal with moral views and the merits of defending morally correct views. I think it's not the best project for left-wing radicals, as we might call ourselves sometimes. So yeah, what do we do with the line between what is right and what is wrong in constitutional material constitutionalism? And I'm probably over the time, but I have a lot more questions, but we can hopefully discuss them later. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for this excellent set of comments and questions. Now, yeah, Zora, it's yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. And this is the second time that I'm discussing Camila's book. Camila knows how much I, personally admire her achievement, how much I'm in alignment with what she has to say. But I mean, she also, I think, knows that I'm in a bit of a predicament here, because I have deep, profound apprehensions, even aversions to the style of argument in which she's engaging, and which actually prevails in the entire political and constitutional theory. Doing theory through semi-historiography, right? So historical approach to doing political theory and historical approach to political problems in general. So I don't know whether it was Machiavelli or somebody else who used this metaphor of ransacking, was it ransacking the treasure troves of antiquity? So there is something precious, some kind of, you can imagine like a pirate's chest of political insight somewhere dug deep in the past, and our task is to come and retrieve it and make something good out of it. So I'm very, very apprehensive and kind of skeptical about it for several reasons. So a way to get to those apprehensions is to ask a question that builds on that metaphor. So who is buying those things that you have recuperated from the treasure troves, right? So there is a pearl necklace and a crown and a chalice, and you have gotten them, metaphorically speaking. So who is buying that? And I mean, that's an important question, because that then has something to tell us about the value and the bang for your buck, how worthy it is to engage in that endeavor, how sensible was that adventure. Another way of asking the same question, I guess, from another point of view is, what is the quantum of common sense in a book such as yours? Or I like to call it my grandmother's test. And I mean, doesn't need to be grandmother. My grandmother was an extremely shrewd woman, but she was barely literate, and that's why I'm using her as an example. So would your grandmother or grandfather or some other figure, would they be able to get to the conclusions that you are proposing without Machiavelli and John McCormick and Rosa Luxemburg? And in this particular case, what would that entail is to realize that in a regime which has forfeited or betrayed or failed in its mission to take care of its people, at a very pedestrian level, the incomes have stagnated for the first time in 100 years in the United States. And by the way, I agree with Anna absolutely about the American bent of the book, which is, I mean, unmistakable, right? So it is inspired, I think, by both, and that's an important thing to mention. So for the first time in 100 years in the United States, life expectancy is falling. So I don't need Machiavelli. Who needs Machiavelli to tell them that this regime or these regimes are failing in some very elementary existential sense, so that it's completely reasonable to reconstitute them so that those whose lives and livelihoods are on the line have a better chance of taking care of themselves politically, right? I don't need Machiavelli. Now, that's a bit too harsh and kind of like a faux ingenue, faux naive way of thinking, because we do know why we need Machiavelli. We need Machiavelli as a credentializing device, as something that facilitates communication with those who would otherwise, be authorized or be legitimate in pretending that they don't understand what you are saying, or that that's not really a scholarly contribution. Now, all of that's fine, and we all know that, and I don't think that that point is particularly insightful. What I do think that it may be insightful, or at least worth mentioning, is that there is a deep irony in that move, because the very thing that facilitates communication, namely using of Deleuze calls it the signed quality of political concepts, because concept of the political is not just the concept of the political, it's the Schmidt's concept of the political, Kant's categorical imperative, Vergara's systemic corruption, right? So the very thing that facilitates scholarly communication, right? Oh, I know which concept of the political you're talking about, is the very thing that frustrates and discourages persuasion, because it allows me to say, oh, that's a Machiavellian approach to this. Oh, it's an Arendtian, et cetera, right? You just plug a adequate suffix, and all of a sudden, Vergara's proposal becomes just that, and nothing more and nothing less, but nothing more than that. Just another proposal. So here we have a panel. Here we have a liberal Democrat and a Kantian and a feminist and a plebeian and a radical. How interesting. But that's not what you want. That's not what anybody wants. I mean, the assumption behind what I'm saying is arrogant in a way, because I'm assuming that we can actually persuade each other that, if we think that our ideas are forceful, that we could and expect to be able to persuade our colleagues. So when it comes to my specific question for Camila, that would be one of them. What are your experiences so far? What are your experiences so far with those that you that you knew are on the opposite side? So question number one, did they get you? Did you make sense to them? And among those that got you, how many of them did you persuade? How often does it happen in this discipline at all that, you read your book or my book or, anybody's book and say, oh yeah, I was wrong. Like my investment in my intellectual capital was wrong. I'm going to write it off and I'm going to become the disciple or the follower of this more sensible line. That doesn't happen because nobody does it, because the name of the game is, I think. So the sub question is, what do you mean by proposal? What do you mean by proposal? Proposal to who? I mean, let's get serious about the business of proposing for once. Proposal to who? And I mean, I think that's a useful question, because let's clarify, are we striving to propose to persuade our colleagues, or the name of the game is get them young? That we are basically writing downstream for grad students and the like, in hopes, that before they enter through the golden gate, that we snatch them kind of to our side. Now, how am I with time? Okay, so another reason why that's not likely to happen. So set aside the sign character of political concepts that allow me to say, oh yeah, I understand, but by what you are doing or saying, but I am not a Machiavellian. So it's not about what should we do with our lives and how to make them better through constitutional institutions, but who you are as a scholar. So that aside, but another reason why that's not likely to happen is because, and here I couldn't, so I was listening, I promise. I was listening to everything that you were saying, but I couldn't resist by making another diagram as I was listening. So here it is. So the reason why that's not likely to happen is because those who are participating in this so-called, but actually phony conversation, because it's not a conversation where we are, or persuasion-oriented conversation, they are what Deleuze has, another Frenchman, Bourdieu, has called penseurs fonctionnaires, the functionaries of the state. That's what's unique about, this was particularly unique about jurists. I mean, that's how they came to be jurists, right? That's how they branched off from the priests, right? Those priests who had an interest in defending royal power and were very kind of brainy, they kind of evolved from priests and became particular kind of priests, right? The jurists. So the name of the game here is that we have reality creators, right? The political class and those in the real world. And in that way, Karl Rove was right, but he kind of used the wrong terminology, I think. So we have reality creators, and then we have the sense makers. We are the sense makers, and we come after, and we have to be dispassionate. And our job is to give counsel, right? So in that sense, if your job is to provide counsel, you're professionally invested in a system which allows you to give counsel. And in this context, no wonder that there are so many devotees of judicial review in this profession, because that allows you to accumulate technical knowledge, to sell that technical knowledge to some who are going to validate you, and then if you're particularly lucky, co-opt you to the realm of the actual, state functions. So you may become a judge of the European Court of Justice or Human Rights, or go on to Venice Commission, or at least be an expert for them. And so it goes. What? You're going to persuade them? How are you going to persuade them, right? So, I mean, you might. That doesn't mean that they're not going to use you as an ornament. So we have an Icon S this, and we have Icon S panel about that, and we have new scholarship. Oh, Camilla, how interesting and wonderful and great. Oh, we are so diverse. We are so diverse. But then, the truth comes out, because the Icon S Congress, in the end, all of the plenary sessions are judges, 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 judges. There is nobody in the world by judges. God forbid that a trade union activist has thoughts and ideas about constitutional law that we would want to listen. So it's a promiscuous kind of little circle, because it's a judiciary academic complex that we are part of. And I mean, it's a bit disingenuous, because, I've gotten an opportunity. I somehow tricked the gatekeepers, and now I'm kind of ruining the party and throwing things around, and, you're being tolerated. But, I would assume that you agree with this diagnosis, but, I would want to hear your opinion on that. And the last thing, those participants in the judiciary academic complex, and broadly, they have a picture of the world in which liberal constitutionalism and liberal democracy fits in. So what you are doing, and with which I completely agree, and you do it probably more skillful than anybody else, probably more than John McCormick, probably more the greats that you have learned from. I find what you are doing, precisely because it's, to an extent, more polemical than what they are doing, also more persuasive. But then I remain skeptical about that as well, because as the first diagram, the first vandalized diagram of yours that I have adapted hopefully shows, is that the thing that you are critiquing is just a part that slots into a wider thing. And it's kind of it's an element in a self-sustaining and supporting grid of concepts and distinctions. So if you plug this one out, or if you try to fit something else in, the other things are not going to allow it to get into its place. And if you destroy it somehow intellectually, they're going to grow back in the place from these other sides. So how much are we achieving if we are leaving the distinction between society and economy alive or in place? How much are we achieving if we keep the idea of pluralistic society unexamined? Because behind the idea of pluralistic society, for example, we have not just groups and associations, we have classes and categorizations. We have legal boxes that we have created that allow some people to pose as philanthropists. So there are no oligarchs, right? So use potato, right? You call them oligarchs, they call themselves philanthropists, thought leaders, and for many theorists, actually, and this is something maybe also that needs to be discussed in this context, there is the reason why bourgeois, so that's John Donne, I think, the reason why bourgeois liberal republic is legitimate is because the bourgeois, economically active bourgeois, are public servants. They're de facto public officials. And I mean, you can find this logic, you know, in around the place. So Russell Hardin made a similar argument. So one thing is to call them parasitic oligarchs that have captured the state, but that doesn't, or not yet, that doesn't speak to the deepest or deeper assumptions that they have about themselves, and more, maybe more tragically, which a lot of people and population at large have about themselves, namely that because they were so successful in a particular endeavor, that they have learned the right to become de facto allocators of social surplus, right? Hence, Elon Musk gets to decide whether to invest in electric cars or in build boring tunnels under Los Angeles or in et cetera, et cetera. So these are the deep assumptions that sustain this imaginary that we haven't talked about. I'll end here, but I'll just hint at my last kind of point, which is about what I think to be the distinguishing feature of contemporary liberals, liberal Democrats, and liberalism. Not their liberalism, but their insistence on sitting in judgment of what words mean, of what liberal means, of what illiberal means, precisely because they call themselves liberal. And from that perspective, I think, I'm not sure, I have to think how useful it is to think about liberal democracy as a combination of democracy and liberalism, because these things change, right? These are boxes in which there is a bunch of components and things inside. The label stays the same, but as those boxes move around, there are people in a particular position who put things in, take things out, and insist that, you know, the content of the box corresponds to the label, and assert for themselves the ultimate right to proclaim what that is, right? So, and the irony of that is that in that way, simply by changing the labels, you are able to bring maybe unsavory content to its destination. So is liberal democracy a democracy that was liberalized, or is liberal democracy a system which is liberal because of the liberating or liberalizing effects of majoritarianism, right? So historically, what we are talking about are authoritarian, autocratic, and aristocratic regimes, if you want to use the terminology that today is undisputable, right? So that's what the 19th century, early 19th century England was. How it became more democratic is by becoming more majoritarian. And becoming more majoritarian at that point meant more liberal, more liberty for all. And now we are pretending that, you know, being majoritarian, being in favor of majority rule is somehow antithetical to liberalism. So anyway, I think that deserves to be unpacked. We cannot do now. I said that I will end, and I will really end. But we shouldn't, as we are paying attention to history, lose sight of the remarkably and increasingly brazen manipulation of words, and the increasingly paradoxically authoritarian and totalitarian tendencies of some of our colleagues who insist that, you know, democracy entails liberalism because this is what these words mean. And ironically, in that way, going against their commitment to equal human dignity, right? Maligning 50% or more of their fellow citizens as being irrational or not able to think straight, and being the permanent peril to the liberal democratic edifice. So I'll end here.
Thank you so much for this wonderful set of comments and questions. I think, Camila, you have many questions, so you can pick and choose.
Yes, thank you. So thank you to Anna and Soran, and I am very happy about this engagement. As Soran knows me more, but I thrive in conflict. So I am happy that this is causing all this stir. So I'm happy to respond. So the first question of Anna, actually, we just were in the session in St. Andrews like 2 hours ago, talking about the kind of the next step on the project, which is plebeian ethics. Because you need that component, and we need to the idea of a plebeian morality, something that comes out of the critical engagement from the plebeian side to the current morality. That is something that it needs to be theorized still, but I think the lens here is emancipation. And it needs to be something that has the historically marginalized and the people that do not rule, the subordinate as the criteria, their well-being as a criteria of what is emancipatory and what is oppressive. And in terms of like the relativity of this, yeah, I'm only, so because I'm proposing only adding something to the system as it is already there, everything would be functioning the same way. So we would have, Congress and the president, that law would be made the same way, and the people would react to what is given to them. So in that way, it's a reactive power of resistance and not of self-government all the time, of making all these decisions that are so kind of high in expertise. In a way, you can veto and say, what is worth vetoing? Vetoing something that affects you, that is really unfair. And of course, then you have the procedures of how much in terms of, if we look at it into an individual way of resisting through, signatures and referenda, then it's about what is the threshold of this discontent in a way, what is going to trigger the changing of the rules. And this is basically arbitrary. We need to decide. But this is the point, that when something is really close to the heart, or you can be in solidarity with someone that has no water, it's not about your water, sharing your water with others. It's about a new legislation. So vetoing is about something new that comes. So something that could be oppressive. For example, in Uruguay, they vetoed the privatization of water. So something that the government wants to do. And today we are completely, we have no power to resist that. And so you need a kind of a weapon in order to say no to something that is oppressive, or a new law that has become oppressive. So for me, it is the definition of that limit and what is oppressive and what is emancipatory, what is a good law and what is a bad law. Because today, as Soran says, are the judges, and the judges are part of the 10%, the richest 10%, or the richest 20%, if we're going to be generous, and like there are working class judges or something, but they have a different worldview. So what is oppressive to them is not the same as oppressive to others. They don't experience the law as in equal terms as other people. So I think, and you brought here the problem of time, and I agree that we cannot be completely engaged all the time. This is something that is a problem. However, we need to have rituals. People that are religious go to mass every Sunday. You shouldn't be going to, your local assembly every Saturday or every Sunday. That would be maybe too much, or you could be, enough. It depends on what, is demanded and what it also entails. If you're going to just discuss politics and go home, it's very different than if you're going to share food and have like a festival and have like a social gathering of the community. This is much more interesting to go to. So you can have once a month, and it will not be that terrible in a way. So in those moments, you would be reviewing things that come from government, or initiating something new. And when you initiate something new, it comes from an expertise that is different from the experts. So people, and this is the example from Chile, people from all walks of life got together in topics that were close to their hearts, from pensions and healthcare, ecology, whatever, and they proposed things that are very, very sophisticated, because basically they were learning from each other. Now the internet allows for an encyclopedia, to be open, before it was not the case. So you can educate. There's YouTube videos. There are, people like me going to places to allow for, popular education in general and kind of translation of these concepts that Soran brings. Of course, this concept allows us to kind of have shortcuts, but also to obscure things and to keep people away from, what is happening, to understand them, because they need so much knowledge to get that concept. Or when you get it, sure, you can decode it, but it's a lot of work to do that. So the thing about conflict and disagreement, yes, sure, this is about conflict and disagreement. It's about how you channel the conflict. And if you think about neighborhood assemblies, of course, you will have different views in the neighborhood assembly, but that assembly will decide by majority. And you say, yeah, majority is unstable. Yes, but one assembly is not going to do anything. If you think about municipalities, so where the jurisdiction of power, you would maybe need 400 assemblies voting by majority to be able to maybe trigger a referenda, right? So you have several steps, but you would need to kind of have an instrument in order to allow the people to get there, not with super majorities in the filter immediately, but by majority. And I think you're right, and this is something that I have been experiencing in Chile, that you need to entrench in a way the way some rules, some basic rules, if you don't want to reproduce the current structures of domination. So the rules of engagement are crucial. Some of the rules that we have been discussing in the councils was that you cannot propose anything that goes against human rights. So that you have like a baseline. For us in Chile, that we had a dictatorship with brutal, repression and violation of human rights, is very important to have that base, that whatever you propose, it cannot go against human rights. And also you cannot deprive others of those rights. So whatever rights you have now, those are the base, and you cannot get rid of it, basically, because the idea of popular initiative is to further emancipation, not to restrict emancipation to a minority while the majority is selecting, the rules. So in order to prevent that, you would need a baseline. And also in the rules of engagement, how you speak. You need to learn how to speak to each other in a manner that is respectful, that has rules about, racist, sexist talk. Also in a manner that is not punitive, but we all learn together, because we all have been brought up in a system which is patriarchal and oligarchic and so on and so forth. So we need to learn together, and that you need rules that are clear. And I think here it's this, like Luther putting the, the new things, the new paradigm on the door, and everybody could read it. The assemblies would need to read the rules every commencing their assemblies, every assembly, basically, because you are open. You bring more people in. You are territorial. You're in a neighborhood. You have, you move in. You want to go to the assembly, and you don't want to go to a scrutiny. You go, and there's rules. Everybody knows the rules because they were read. So and then you can self-police in a way. Of course, that does not abolish domination within. And some of the proposals is to exclude some of the members of your community. For example, if you have the local priest in your assembly, that priest has a clout and authority over people that will, muddle the judgment and could kind of swing the assembly in many ways. So in order to avoid that, the people that are in positions of power should self-exclude or be excluded by the community. And there are very few, in a way, if you think about the people that will be excluded in this way. And I think it is, most of your concern is about the transition from a society that is individualistic, that is egoistic, that doesn't function like this, that there's no space for power, to one that it is, basically, that we are functioning individuals in a more solidaristic and communitarian society. How do we get there? Because and this is one of the surprise diagram of Soran at the beginning, basically, that there is a cultural, there are layers. I am only seeing here the political constitutional layer, but there are other layers that interact. So therefore, we are individuals, and as Rosa Luxemburg said, we cannot make the revolution with egoistic and self-interest morons. Basically, we need to re-educate ourselves, and the only way to re-educate ourselves is through praxis, through going to the assembly, to doing these practices of political action, and not just theorize about it, not just write about it, not just continue to vote accordingly, but actually be there and start deliberating in this sense. So there's a transition. There's going to be a lot of of people that are going to be cogs in the machine, and they're going to be assemblies that are going to be used for domination instead of emancipation. But I think that is the cost to pay, because otherwise you will need to regulate them. I need to regulate them. You need the experts saying what can be and cannot be done. So therefore, that is already a form of hierarchy that needs to be avoided, because that means that the assemblies are not autonomous and that the states have too much power over them. It's still, you know, still I need to think about that a little bit more. And to just reiterate the expert versus plebeian divide is that there are today representative government doesn't work. We have politicians that are not really, they're not experts on anything, you know, they are really not good in terms of like anything else other than campaigning, and they govern, and they have experts that help them, right? There's already there. So I think if we would have a more political, you know, institution from the people, then the representative government would be more towards the expertise, the real expertise, and not just some moron, you know, being candidate, you know, and we're voting for them, because we already have the power to decide. So they would be more, it will work better, I would say. Maybe not, you know, the best, but it would be much better than what we have now, because we will be able to remove them or to, you know, have other forms of accountability that we don't have today. And the expert will remain, and the plebs would have their own expertise coming from below, because they're also an expertise that we are, you know, to either blind or undervalue it, which is the expertise coming from lived experience. And if we're talking about, you know, climate crisis, that expertise that comes from the experiences of suffering, of, you know, the droughts and the floodings, this is what we need in order to change the world, and not just experts and scientists. We need both in a way. Then in terms of like moving back of rights, I want to here draw to John Stuart Mill again. It's someone that is a liberal, but you know, it is very progressive in his thought in many ways. And for him, there is such a thing as consolidated truths. He says that everything needs to be, when he's talking about, you know, critical judgment and how do you learn things, and how do you need to, you know, teach students, and how do you really know what is true and what is false, and you know what is freedom of speech and all these things. He thinks that everything needs to be critically engaged with, that everything needs to be thought as an adversarial model, that we need to try to disarm, you know, and this is the way that we learn and we have critical thinking, not just like learning by reciting. And that is not, but he says that is not everything is like this. It's not that we can bring, for example, slavery as a kind of a critical point, and some people advocating for slavery, because everything can come. It's not relativism in this manner, but there are consolidated truths, and we build from that in a way, and we criticize, and we don't not talk about slavery in a way. We don't say, okay, slavery was so bad that we're never going to talk about it, we put it in the closet. No, we engage with it critically, but always critically, because it is not going into human flourishing or emancipation. So therefore, it's a consolidated truth that we have arrived at equality, at human equality. So that is the minimal. So there has to be principles informing, you know, these basic rules of engagement, which I touch upon a little bit when in the Arendt chapter about deliberation and promise, that there are equality and respect are embedded in the form of engagement of assemblies. And then, well, for Soran's all these kind of existentialist questions, oh my God, who is buying my booty? You know, this is my booty of, you know, the historical booty of the institutions that I'm bringing. Well, actually quite a lot of people, if you were surprised. Not in the way that, you know, it's not everything is straightforward, but my involvement in the constituent process in Chile is interesting, because we now we have three defensorias, three tribunates, basically. One defending the people in a kind of like a collective category, not individually, yeah, and with the ability to recommend legislation, to do all kinds of things to help materialize the human rights and the socioeconomic rights. We have a tribunate of nature. Basically, there's going to be in charge of protecting nature and making those rights to be materialized, and not only protecting, but regenerating, you know, the nature and the cycles and all these things. So very interesting. And then we have another tribunate, a defensoria of children, because children have been abused in Chile by everyone. It's terrible. Actually, now at 4 p.m. now, there's a report on all the abuse of children in Chile. And someone that I know is already telling me this is going to be awful, but we need to look at it. And this is something that you cannot do it through the courts, again, individually, but you need an institution that is autonomous, that is selected in a different manner, that is not it's not horse trading between the, the executive and the Congress. This is how we have done it in the past, right? The separation of powers, but it's experts, and also experts promoted by the civil community, by the community. So in a way, it is a mixed organ that is has input from societies, which is very remarkable and very different. So that's one thing, for example, and it was not my idea, but I have been, I went to the Constitutional Convention like 4 times to give several speeches in different, different areas. One of them was the Tribunate of the People, the Defensoría de los Pueblos, and it came through, and it was not, I was not the only one. So it's not my ideas. I think my book is in trend with other things that are happening at civil society level, not at the academic level. So I am perhaps the only academic that is in this, but the majority of people on the ground are, looking at other innovations elsewhere that other movements have pushed for and have achieved things. So I think it is more widespread, not in the first world, but in the global south. A lot of interest. And who is buying? So in addition to the civil community, and I don't know, but I translated and abridged the book into this pamphlet called República Plebeya, and basically it's a pamphlet for action. And I use Machiavelli and Rosa Luxemburg and Condorcet, as you say, like authoritative credentials, because it's not me, a woman from the global south saying, hey, this is the way. I'm using all these men, and all these other women that are, have of stature in order to prop myself up, because it's not also my idea. I'm not so original. I'm just taking the bits and pieces of, my treasure, that I found, and mixing it up and putting it up for everybody to take. I have been, because of the eclectic nature of the book, it's not only about a history of political thought. So you would be fascinated to know that I have had 0 engagements with history of political thought, 0. Like there had no Machiavelli expert. John McCormick went to my panel and he was very congratulatory, but he was not going to push me on Machiavelli. It was more. So, but there has not been a real panel on the history of political thought on the 4 big chapters, that I had, painstakingly, nothing. I have had lots of lawyers from many parts of Latin America, especially Colombia and Mexico, Costa Rica too, who are interested in corruption. Because for them, as scholars and lawyers that deal with corruption and all the kind of like the ticket boxes that you need to tick in order to be transparent and all these things, we do everything, but it's worse than before. What do? We don't understand. So this is kind of like illuminating for them, like another concept that for them makes more sense than the things that they already have. So I think it practitioner-wise has been very well received. So I am not well received by the scholarly community in general. And now, yes, more and more. But I would say that it has been more echoed in the practitioners and in the civil society as something that makes sense in a way, that people are done with, being swindled in the representative system, and they either don't vote and they became apathetic, or if they're getting, and of course the book is only took speed because of the uprising. The people got together in councils. So they were actually doing the thing that I was writing about. And it was, something that happens in history and reemerge again. And therefore they said, oh, this is great. So it was, right time, right place, all these things. And the proposal is the same. The proposal is for who? I don't care about, the academics. The proposal is not for them. I don't know if I told you, but chapter 9, which is the proposal, was the first chapter that I wrote. So I wrote it 15 years ago and has been edited basically because I have read all the stuff already, but I didn't write it. So I had to go and do all the research to actually back up all the stuff that I have, in my mind. And therefore it had a clear purpose of, opening the road for people to think differently, at least to say, oh, if we want something more radically democratic, what is out there? There was nothing out there. It was just the permanent revolution and all these other things that have no structure, so people cannot hold on to it. So my main audience here, it was the people, and it was the Constitutional Convention, actually. So, all these degrees and all these things help out, and all these icon-s panels help out because I'm validated, and I'm not just me talking about these things, which I have no authority whatsoever. So, Let me see. Yeah, and the judiciary and the public service, this is very interesting. I'm just going to say one thing about this. Actually, in the convention in Chile, and this, I'm going to look back to Chile, the greatest problems is the jurists. It's full of lawyers, and the lawyers are indoctrinated into not only in regular, constitutionalism, but Pinochet's constitutionalism. So they are the most backward, conservative people you can meet. To them, nothing can be done. There's no, you cannot do this, you cannot this needs to be this way. It's horrible. Coming from, a US lawyers and academia, in general, that is very more creative in a way that how can we get our point across? What can we retrieve in order to make Chile is the other way around. This is the way, we cannot do it elsewhere, that's it. So a lack of imagination. And also the kind of like the people that run the convention, the civil servants themselves, who are the people that take the voting and kind of like they're the mediators or the, master of ceremonies, they also play a role, a bureaucratic role of what can be done and what is against protocol. So it's incredible how the constituent power is being limited and disciplined by the lawyers within that are basically talking back down to the representatives of the people that come from like a regular background, like teachers and transport workers or whatever that who were elected, and say, oh, the lawyers say this and that. I don't know anything. They are the experts. Maybe we should think of proposing this thing. And at the end, they revolted. They revolted, and the lawyers became like the kind of not the enemy, but everybody understood very fast that they were part of the problem because they were not creative enough. In a way, you don't need lawyers to create a new constitution. You need lawyers to interpret the constitution, to develop it, but not to really create it. That is a political document, and therefore it needs to be straightforward, a regular language, and not needs to be like this. So and finally, the democracy and liberalism. Yeah, this is a problem. I don't think it is connected. And my advisor, Nadia Urbinati, who is a liberal, she would say there's nothing, democracy is liberal in itself, liberal in the way that it protects human rights, protects the human rights of the citizens, right? Of, we're all equal. This is part of democracy. There is freedom of speech, freedom to dissent, to vote, to make law. This is, it's not liberal. That is not liberal. How I read liberal is about property. The state is there to protect property. And this is the basic thing. And everything is understood through that lens. So that is what is so dangerous in terms of, defining liberalism and illiberalism. Because how can we really put in the same balance, like violating property rights and expropriating big business versus killing people? Or genocide, or oppressing women. This is not the same. One is things, and the other are people. So therefore, bunching it into something illiberal and therefore anti-democratic, when you actually need redistribution, when you have, for example, in Latin America, that the 10% richest owns 77% of the national wealth. So you need to violate property rights. And that doesn't mean that you are illiberal in that manner that, people are saying the right-wing, far-right politicians are. So I think we really need to separate. And I believe I am post-liberal. With Anna, we need to move forward. So we have condensed truths, we have them, consolidated truth, we need to move forward and not allow for the Schmittian understanding of popular sovereignty that has no limits, but the people come together and they can decide anything because they're the masters of themselves. This is just, something that doesn't exist. It's an absolutism, and that is the vehicle for further oppression. So I think we need to move back from that, but not not embrace liberalism. I mean, it's a kind of a fussy area, but this is what I think. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for these excellent responses, Camila. So now we open the session for Q&A. You can use the raise hand function or the chat box to ask questions. Yes.
Is that me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the session in the morning we did in San Andrews. I am professor of religion and politics here at San Andrews. It is impossible, I just did a review of Camila's book for a group of people involved in religious studies and so on. It is very difficult to read the book without reading the second book, the manual, as Camila calls it. Because simply, you know, if you read chapter 9, and then you read the Spanish edition manual that was used with the communities by her, they read like two different worlds. And so therefore, you know, I think the comments, you know, by Sora and Anna are absolutely right. Yes, even Anna said, you know, the book feels US, feels American. To me, it never did, because I come from the other context. I mean, I've been away for 40 years, but you know, I go and look at the other context. So I was going to say that, you know, I am in the camp who is totally convinced by this argument. Particularly, we have been discussing the issue of religion. Do you exclude priests? Who exclude priests? Why would they be excluded? And there is a direct line, if you take the application of the book, direct line with popular movements in Latin America, for example. Maybe that's why, in a way, we understand it, in that people are politically minded 150%. So that, for example, at age 13, I had my first political meeting. We are political animals. And so therefore, I was going to suggest that this book will create an upheaval in many of us, because simply the fact that there will be another one and another one, this is not a single work that you could say, okay, this is it, but it is on the making. And with the Constitution of Chile, I think this discussion will come back. And here, let me be blunt and direct. The fact is that for the rest of the world, outside the context of the first chapters, democracy is a very funny thing. I mean, I fully understand the adherence to liberal democracies and different things. But for example, I am in the UK. Do we have a democracy or not? We have a very ancient constitution, but actually we don't elect the head of state. Neither they do in Norway, Finland, etc., etc. So the majority of the G8 do not elect their leaders. And so from that point of view, and the UK and the center where I am, it was very striking to the people who came to the morning, very, very distinguished academics, that actually this was applicable, for example, to Scotland, because simply, you know, the devolved system does not allow the Scottish plebeians to actually take decisions, that the system of land and former landlords then did not work. And let me just finish with one, because, you know, I am convinced by the argument, and we could have with Soren a beer somewhere and come to blows. But, you know, my understanding of Rico, for example, is that Rico created a system whereby texts are used as social systems, not the other way around. And I think this is the difference between people from the global south who looks at the text of Camila and people from the global north, is that the action creates, this is the 1979 essay by Paul Ricoeur on text as social action. The social actions create the text and not the other way around. And this is where I think the disagreement comes, a very positive disagreement between these two worlds, in that the context makes the constitutions rather than the constitutions making the context. That's all I felt very strongly that I needed to say. But Soren's criticism, yes, they need to be addressed. You have a great argumentative person in Camila who we will not back. But I think the context and interpretation of context is something that is changing. I have worked in the Constitution of Somaliland, which is a very new country now, talking to the states about it. I wrote about the first constitution in 2015. And it was very clear that the principle was that the action of the Somalis made the constitution rather than borrowing a constitution from somewhere else. And what was very distinct about that constitution, unlike the constitution of Kenya, in which I worked in 2010, was simply that God was present in a Muslim constitution, and they would not have a liberal democratic constitution because simply they believed that, in a sense, the metaphysical principles were together with the realists. And so there is a long discussion here. There is a conference to be made in a sense of what constitutes the possibilities of law and so on. Sorry, I've spoken too much, but I've read this work many times, and I must say I'm convinced by the argument.
Thank you for the support. Soran, you had something, no?
Can I?
Yes, give it to me. Give it to me. Yes, yes.
You know, I love these. I mean, I come from Eastern Europe, so there is some kind of kinship in terms of temperament, maybe between Eastern Europe and South America, which allows us to speak more directly like this. So to use Camila's phrase, you may be surprised that I'm not at all surprised by the success that you've been having in the civil society in Latin America, and I completely agree, actually, with Mario's interpretation or pushback and defense of Camila's position, because and this allows me to maybe sharpen my point and kind of get my ultimate target more clear. When I did read the book, I couldn't leave the US component aside. And I think you're the last person to deny that it doesn't have a US component and the US struggles and the US system in mind. So in that way, it is an amalgam of Chile and the United States, simply because that's been your lived experience. Now, the reason why I'm so preoccupied with making sense to those who shape the content of the common sense is because those that I have in mind are those that shape it in the context of North America and Western Europe. And the reason why I have that in mind, and here we may have profound disagreement or not about my long-term geopolitical bet, which is that we've just extended our protection agreement with the United States for the next 50 to 75 years by the events over the last couple of months. So I think it's futile to pretend that the preferences of the US government, preferences and the mindset of the American society at large, connecting and interacting with the US government, doesn't at some point down the line end up influencing the margin of political and constitutional choice in Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Chile in particular. The fact that it doesn't at this point, well, I mean, we can look back in history, and I mean, there are plenty of examples that shows when they get their mind set on certain kind of political changes, that has a fair chance of happening. And I mean, the last couple of months in Europe, one striking thing is that they have been successful in bringing back, forget about Russia and Ukraine, but bringing back France and Germany in line. So if they've been able to do that, the United States government, our global hegemon, protector, and leader, I mean, taking a longer historical horizon, the idea that they wouldn't be in a position to do something similar in global South is, well, it's naive or it's optimistic. I don't know how to call it, which is why, and this is my last sentence, I hope, those kinds of interventions, at least from now on, they need to have that needs to be a double-edged sword in a good way. They need to speak and continue speaking to local contexts, and it's awesome that they succeed. But the other side, I think, must be forever from now on directed to what obviously continues to be the center that determines the frame of political and constitutional action in the long run.
Can I say something about the US?
Maybe we take a couple of questions and then in the interest of time. I think Anna, you have something? Yeah.
Yeah, but if you want to reply to this, because then my question is probably unrelated to this point, I don't mind. So whatever.
Yeah, very fast. Yeah, so the US, of course, it is, first of all, it was the US is the first modern representative government. So therefore it is kind of ground zero of how we think about it. And is the longest democracy in the world. So it is kind of a case study of how it has, evolved. So my examples are in general from the US, but it could have been any other country in a way, it doesn't matter. And the chapter 9 has, Manhattan or as an example, but it could be anywhere. It is just, was a strategic choice. Because if I put, my examples were Chile, I would imagine that would have way less traction. So especially from a female that's from Latin America, trying to do political philosophy, people immediately say, oh, you work in Latin American politics, and they want to, oh, you work in Chile. It's like, no, I try to do something that is beyond my global South identity. So therefore I chose strategically that. But what is in my mind is a society in which it's even easier because the US has a myth of its own constitution. There are people that believe in the constitution, believe in the narrative. In Chile, that's not the case because the constitution was made by that dictator. So it's easier to make the point than in the US. The US was the more difficult case, I would say. That's why I chose it, because it's the longest run and the empire. And I think you're completely right. Empire cannot be waived in a way. It's going to come. And therefore, also the kind of climate change, we have so much to talk about this, but yeah, it is the factic power, it is there, actual power that it needs to be reckoned with. Yes.
Shall I go?
Yeah. Sure.
Thanks, Camila, for your reply earlier to my comments. It's very nuanced, very to the point, spot on, and I'm glad that you mentioned you covered all of and you answered all of my questions, and I'm looking forward to that next project on Levian ethics. Two more questions that I had written down earlier and I couldn't make. One is I'm slightly concerned with the idea of institutionalizing local assemblies to the extent that they might dilute actual social movements, right? We've seen that, for instance, in Spain, during the 15M, I was there, all of us were there. And we had the strongest social movements, demonstrations in the last, at least 2 decades. And then I was part of Podemos and I was involved there and all of this. And now the social movements are nowhere. It's not that we institutionalized social movements through anything close to what you're proposing, which is obviously far more interesting. Everything was challenged through the constitution of a political party, and we know, how that's usually end. But I do wonder, whether there are similar risks we could jeopardize spontaneous and autonomous grassroots social movements if we, constitutionalize it. Right? So it seems a bit, it's fruitful, but also paradoxical. And then a second point, and I can't believe I'm saying this, and this is now recording, so it's for the annals of history. But let me be a little bit corporativist here and defend lawyers and law for once. Sometimes I do feel that constitutional lawyers, it's not that we are, or maybe we are indeed out of depth, because there are so many things going on up there. But not everything is constitutional. Not every problem up there has to do with constitutional theory and constitutional design. Why are we saying it's the economy idiots again? It used to be that way, and I think we could perhaps just go back to that. Let's have a look at the economy, if these are the kind of things that we are looking into. Surely we can pack into constitutionalism and constitutional thought all of the other things that we like and be as interdisciplinary as we want. And we need to talk to each other and not only past each other. So I'm all in for that. But yeah, maybe we're asking too much of constitutionalism, which is, in principle, just an area of the law that humbly and modestly say who's meant to do what, you know, in running the country, and when and why and how, based on, you know, some ideas of political morality. But, you know, things like measuring the effects of the impact of public policy, I'm a trained constitutional lawyer. I cannot do that. I've got no idea how to do that. That's the work for sociologists. That's the work for you know, people that can engage in public policy, economists. I don't know. So while I do welcome those kind of things, I don't think it's for constitutional lawyers to blame necessarily. At least, hopefully, not all of us. So yeah, those are the points I wanted to make today.
So. Before you answer Anna's questions, I think I will add two small questions, Camila, if I may. I really like your idea of the mixed constitution, especially the role of the plebeian branch as a freedom maintaining and enhancing constitutional mechanism, rather than an apparatus of self-government within even the existing constitutional order. So my question is, you know, related to the identity of the plebeian branch. Who are the subjects of this branch? How can we identify them? And I think that, you know, the distinction you draw between the few who are well represented in the existing constitutional systems, and the many who do not have a, you know, according to your theory, a genuine representation, is an interesting way of rethinking our constitutional institutions. I think the question remains, you know, the boundary problem between the few and the many. And the second question is, you know, when I was, you know, I read your book a while ago and I was reading it, you know, for this event. So I didn't have the idea that you had, you know, Chile in mind. I was like, okay, this is something that takes US in the background. So the question is, how do you see the role of global constitutionalism in your analysis? You know, I ask this because in much of the global South, even including in the global North to some extent, national constitutional systems have to interact and respond to forces of global constitutionalism that in one or another way constrain freedom, right? So, and I was wondering whether the mixed constitution, you know, you are proposing, could offer a better institutional protection for freedom to people in the global North and South in a similar manner. I think you have like a minute to respond. Thank you.
Oh my God, that's a great questions. Okay, first, I think the problem of institutionalizing local assemblies and what happened in Spain is a problem that when you try to you work in the system disempowers you. So, and we saw this with the assemblies in Chile. Whenever there's an electoral cycle, the people go out of the assembly to do the campaigning. However, there is a synergy and a complementarity between the mass movement that takes the streets or does direct action and the people in the assemblies, because in the assemblies is where everything is plotted, basically, and the network functions. So I think it is mutually reinforcing. And the only way that you're going to get an infrastructure of, you know, popular network of people actually getting together is that you give them power, because this is an ongoing process. So the process of resisting oligarchic domination and all that entails is forever in a way. It is one thing at a time. So therefore you need to keep engagement. There's always something to be resisting to. And of course, then it would be, you know, fewer things, and the system would work better, I would say. But I would say if you have the power to stop things or to propose things, to force government to do certain things, then people will the numbers in the assemblies will not dwindle. However, if you go the political party route, then you're done, because you triumphed in a way. You got to the party and then you're done, because especially in Spain, you have representative, you know, proportional representation. You will never kind of winner take all president kind of style. So it is always marginal as a now they're in government, but in the coalition, all this horse trading at the end that demobilizes the people. So I think going the electoral way is demobilizing the people, and is more complementary, the mass movement with the assemblies. In experience. And in the terms of what is constitutional, I need to disagree here, because for me, the constitutions are a political document of allocation of power. And historically, we have had things that should not be constitutional. For example, marriage between a man and a woman is the most prevalent rule in many constitutions in the West, and that is not a constitutional question. So we have put before things are not strictly constitutional from the more juridical point of view into the Constitution. And now the Constitution has become a device to redress all the inequalities and injustices of society. So therefore, it is more demanding in a way. We put more weight on the Constitution in order to try to redraw, because in a way it is the boundaries of, or the forcing to the state to do things. Because if we don't have that forcing of things that might not be constitutional, maybe like providing some service or some about the sovereignty of food, of the seeds, for example. There is a provision that we put in, like the seeds need to be preserved by the campesinas and the indigenous peoples. And maybe you say, well, that's public policy of agricultural ministry, right? No, but we have been flooded with Monsanto and other Bayer things, that have doesn't allow for people to actually plant their own seeds because they have patents. So you need that in the Constitution entrenched in order to force the change. So Chile again is an extreme. You have many things to change. So we have currently 499 articles to be harmonized. So basically it's going to be like this. So there's a lot in there. And I think the more unequal the society or the more redress you need, the more packed is going to be the Constitution. And I'm right that you're right that it's maybe asking too much. But I think the material constitutionalism, and I think I spoke to what Soran was saying about constitutional review. It shouldn't be judges reviewing what is constitutional or not, because the Constitution is a political document, and therefore it needs to be an interdisciplinary board, interdisciplinary institution that is autonomous, kind of seeing if what the Congress said or the president said is constitutional or not, and not just some judges that are actually detached from what is happening. So I think that we need to debase the juristocracy, not by eliminating constitutional review, because we need it. There are problems that we need to sort out, but by a group of experts, community, and jurists all together in order to figure out what is the impact of some law in society, because we need that. We need those numbers. And of course, neither you or I are statisticians, and we need those. So this is part of it that we need to incorporate. And I think academia is going that way, PPE, PPLE, the political philosophy, economics, and law, they're all coming together to make new degrees that are integrated, because they understand that the law is political and it's has economic impact. So I think we need to move away from that and not put all the burden in the constitutional lawyers in a way, and have backup as a more interdisciplinary board. And in terms of your questions of the plebeian subject and the division between the few and the many. So I resolved this in the book, and I resolved it against other proposals of excluding based on wealth. That is like the classical division between the few and the many. And for me, that is illiberal, in the sense that you are depriving some of us from political rights, that rights to veto law, to initiate law, like hardcore power, because of the amount of money they have. And of course, there's always an arbitrary cut. You can make $1 more, less another dollar, before in this different year, and you're excluded or included. And this is very arbitrary. And I think that is not the way to go. I think the boundary should be territorial. People should participate where they reside, where they are, because there is where they live the experience, and they can interact more easily with the government, because it is the municipality is the kind of the first line of interaction, where you have more power of pressure. So the boundaries should be territorial. And I resolve this as an understanding the people as subject that is thought from a class-based perspective, in the sense of second-class citizenry, of people that do not have power, but philosophically from the point of view of no rule, the people that do not have power over others. And of course, this is not clean in the boundaries, because there are people like priests, for example, that have power over others. We have jurists who have power over others. A judge in a local community would have a lot of clout, right? So you have different levels of hierarchy within, and the problem of wealth is the most important one in terms of the few and the many. What do you do with the few oligarchs? Well, you know, they're all bound, they all live in the same place. They would have their own assembly, 1, 2, or 3, because they're few. So it doesn't matter. You don't exclude, you don't need to exclude them. For me, that is like the more realist, pragmatic way of looking at it. Because if the majority of people are in a precarious, you know, condition, and there are the many in this philosophical way of, you know, de facto second-class citizens, then you will have a response from that network of assembly that will tend to benefit those who are in a marginalized position. So therefore, I wouldn't say that is a problem. If the few powerful become 40% of the population, that's a good thing, you know, and maybe that would bring balance too. So I'm not close to that. And in terms of global constitutionalism, we have just replicated the same structures that we have at the national level and the supranational level, which are, you know, representative institutions, technical institutions. And this is not going to solve anything, because at the end of the day, what moves the world is money and power, and not really experts. You know, experts are shouting every day that we're going, you know, down the drain in terms of like climate crisis, and we are already in it and we cannot get out of it, and we don't listen. So it's not expert, it's just the oligarchs. And therefore, I think this network of assemblies of the people could be very useful in terms of global constitutionalism, as you say, as a mixed kind of constitution, which you have the representative supranational institutions, but you also have the people assembled in every nation. And you can have a global citizenry, not in the abstract, you know, kind of like sleeping sovereign kind of situation, but actually assembled people that make decisions at the local level that have global impact. So you can you could have a climate legislation, for example, start, or some veto coming from a locality, and we can, as in solidarity, you know, vote against, you know, maybe extraction in the Amazon, because the Amazon is from all of us, basically, not only of Brazil or Ecuador. You know, we can all pitch in our protection of that if we are assembled, and we can, and there are actually communities that do not know the boundaries. Indigenous communities overlap. They go to different, you know, they're in 3 different nations, in 3 different states. So therefore, it is more conducive to a more global or a regional kind of constitutionalism than the structures that we have today. So I think it's promising in that manner too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we could talk about the book the whole day or the whole morning, depending on where you are. But, you know, as everything in life, it has to, you know, it has to end somehow. Thank you so much for this, you know, excellent discussion and conversation. Our next event would be, is scheduled for the 27th of June. And we will be featuring another excellent book by Mark Masood, Sharia Inshallah, Finding God in Somali Legal Politics, published by Cambridge University Press in 2021. Thank you so much for joining us today, and see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for organizing, and for Anna and Soran for their generous comments and discussion. I like it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mario.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Great. Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Bye.
Ciao.